following pictures were posted on my MSAR forum by a member. This is a clip, of course, from the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, but the point in this instance has not necessarily to do with the movie, but the costumery. Here the actor, Charlton Heston, is wearing the traditional robes of the Levites. We've already been addressing in part 1 of the presentation the importance of the Levites, the importance of the 12 tribes, their actual origins. We covered the fact that Moses as a character may be identified with the Pharaoh Akhenaten. Pay attention to the red and the black and the white coloring of the tunic. All Jews will recognize that. All Jews will also recognize this Nazi flag. How many have noticed that the colors are identical? How many have noticed the Knights of Malta cross, which is nothing more than a pyramid seen from above? How many have noticed the swastika, which is originally astrological, representing the movement of Ursa Minor and also Ursa Major for that matter? It's the old symbol of Saraswati. It's the old symbol of the fire gods of the Aryans. It is also 2 stylized serpents. But most importantly, the red, the black, and the white. On paper, we think the Jews and the Nazis are disconnected. Here we have a Nazi propaganda poster. Notice the pose of the male figure in the poster, undoubtedly carrying a red. Even though this image is black and white, we can surmise that he's holding the red flag with the Nazi swastika. All very common imagery we've seen in programs that deal with the Nazis. But here we have a commercial poster for American Meat Roundup during the war. How come it contains exactly the same kind of male figure and exactly the same pose holding the American flag? Why is the imagery the same? What are we being told here? I'm putting these in front of you because they make a perfect case for the subtextual, subliminal style of communication. These are in fact quite blatant examples, but they serve to illustrate the point of how important it is to be symbol literate. In part 1 we showed that the real king of the Jews, or Judites, or Jewess, was Akhenaten, the king of Amarna, here styled himself as the great lion of Judah with the Aten disc above his head. He is the root of all the various forms of corrupted solar worship that came out of Egypt and which infected Britain and other countries. We see the lion is also shown in the Indian Vedic tradition. It's the tutelary symbol of the goddess, and that goddess turns up as Britannia, not because the idiom or the trope moved from the east to the west, but the reverse. From the book of Numbers, chapter 2, verse 3, we read, "And on the east side, towards the rising of the sun, shall they of the standard of the camp of Judah pitch throughout their armies." And in the strange garbled language of the Bible, we basically are hearing in that passage of the rising of the sun, and that the Judites are facing the sun. This, of course, again identifies, and albeit cryptically, that the Judites are Atenists, turning to the horizon, turning to where Aten rises. Genesis 49 emphasizes that Judah, the tribe of Judah, is a lion's whelp. All is explained when we understand what a whelp is. A whelp is the offspring, the young of a lion. So Judah is the lion. Judah is the servant of the lion. But Romans 2 gives us a new perspective. He is not a Jew who is one outwardly, but he is a Jew who is circumcised of heart. Now in part 1 we emphasize this, about what a true Aryan is, what a true Jew is, a man of the trees, an elder, an astrologer, a man fit to heal the earth, the original Judites, that is. And here we find it in the Bible, Romans. that a Jew is not somebody who wears garments or robes or a yarmulke or goes to synagogue. A Jew is a man pure of heart. It's as simple as that. In Revelation 2:9, it says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So the obelisk doubles as a symbol for Lucifer. The lion is the symbol of these Atonists. And in the true meaning of the terms that they've adopted, that they've cannibalized and that they've appropriated, of course, they're not the original. They are most definitely the fake, regardless of what song they sing, regardless of what dance they do, regardless of what palava they create and write, regardless of the edifices they put out and the statues that they erect. These are moral degenerates. Now, Jacob Prasch, in a book called Jesus in the Talmud, writes, one way to understand modern Judaism is to compare it to Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. Those churches claim to be Christian, but if one reads the New Testament, it is quickly obvious that they are not at all Christian. Rather, they are built from largely pagan traditions which have little or nothing to do with the original teachings of Jesus and the apostles. This is a religion that comes in the guise of Christianity, bearing the title Christian Church, but it is in no way true to what Jesus taught. That's right, the real Jews, those signified by the fasci, those waving the flags, symbolized by the lions, the great lions, the lion head, which you find on so many mausoleums and government bodies and edifices. These are the Merovingians. These are the old members of the Dragon Court. It's got nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do with bloodline and the control of the human race. The lion, of course, is a symbol of Mark, which is also the symbol of Vatican City. The lion is the symbol of Vatican City. We find, as we point out in part 1, that the lion is used in the British heraldry and appears even on the famous door of 10 Downing Street. The symbol of the Jesuits. These are ostensibly a Catholic order, but they're so much more than that for those who've really done their homework. Look at their logo. The IHS was sacred to Bacchus, who is a form of Dionysus. Dionysus being a form of the Celtic, or more correctly the Irish, Isus. So the Christian Jesus is nothing unique. But the symbol of the Jesuits, it just happens to be a sun disk. Many images of the Christ, of Jesus, show him with the rays, the solar rays, emphasizing again Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism. These are all branches of Atonism, just in the same way that Atonism is a branch of Ammonism, and just in the same way that Ammonism is a branch of Druidism. The previous quotes, they spoke of the synagogue of Satan. They addressed the false Jews. On the left we see a symbol of the British portcullis. It's actually a symbol for the Revenue Department of England, and it's designed with 12 squares like a Cohen or serpent breastplate. Now the term Cohen means serpent priest, and for those who have never seen a Cohen breastplate before, the figure in the center there is wearing one. That breastplate there is of 12 gems. It's mentioned in the book of Revelation. He's the Jewish high priest, and that breastplate is often referred to as the Urim and the Thummim, with 12 diadems. The Levites, of course, were originally Irish Druids, as we saw in part 1, and not Jews as we know them today. Here's the Masonic version. Here's the Masonic compass and rule with the diadem, the Urim and Thummim, with 12 compartments. Exactly the same as the British symbol for the Revenue Department. Frederick Haberman, in his book Tracing Our Ancestors, says the Druids were dressed in white robes, the bard in blue. The Archdruid wore a golden breastplate set with 12 jewels, similar to the breastplate of the High Priest of Israel. Such a breastplate has been found on a skeleton in one of the Stonehenge tombs. In part 1 we talked about these connections between East and West. We talked about the kings Menes and Skota and Tia Tefi and Jeremiah and other Eastern peoples L.A. Waddell, the author, pointed out in his work about Brutus, the Trojan, moving west from the east, of course, albeit in later times. And here we have again clear and distinct evidence written by a leading British Israelite who's happy to tell you that the Jews got their breastplate, this very, very important piece of regalia, from the Druids. In fact, the very robes that these rabbis and priests of the East wear were original to Irish Druidism. Samuel Sharp, in his excellent book Egyptian Mythology and Egyptian Christianity, says the breastplate of judgment worn by the Jewish high priest, called the Urim and Thummim, meaning emblems of royalty and truth, was also borrowed from Egypt, as we learn from these names, which are derived from the Egyptian words Oro, meaning king, and Thumé, meaning justice or truth. The god Horus Ra is Uro, and the goddess with a feather on her head is Thumé. So there's the Egyptian aspect of it. But in our work we always emphasize that most of the Egyptian traditions, especially those of the Ammonists, which certainly go back to pre-dynastic times, meaning much further back than the history books and the Egyptologists are wont to tell us, these were inherited from the Shemsu Hor, or the disciples of Horus, that I believe came from the West, the Druids. George Smith, in his book The Gentile Nations, published in 1853, this is a book on the Egyptian origin of Hebrew religious symbols. He says, when engaged in judicial duties, the archjudge wore, suspended by a chain from his neck, a small figure ornamented with precious stones. This was a representation of the goddess worshipped under the twofold character of truth and justice, and was called Thumé. It has been supposed, with good reason, that this was a corruption of the same patriarchal element afterward developed in the Hebrew religion as the Thummim of the high priest. The picture at the bottom right is of Sir Thomas More wearing what is known as the chain of the Essen, or the Esses. It has little S's all the way around it. With the in the center, it's the Triskelion of the Irish. But the S's collar is obviously a rendition of the god, the sun god Essa. Here we see Pope Paul VI wearing the Jewish Cohen breastplate that we've been talking about. So it turns up in Catholicism now. The popes are wearing it. Well, we've always been mentioning that the popes are the descendants, ideological descendants of the cult of Aton from Egypt. The Vatican is a front for the all-powerful cult of Aton, which also funds the Illuminati and the Masonic orders. The chief Jesuit is referred to as the General, which just happens to be a term that Akhenaten used for himself. The skull cap that is also worn by Jewish rabbis was originally worn by the sun priests of Egypt. Heraldry, British heraldry, European heraldry, German heraldry, Austrian heraldry, French heraldry, Belgian heraldry, Scottish heraldry. What do we see? We see the eagle, we see the phoenix-type bird, and we see the lion and the dragon images combined. Sometimes we see 3 claws or 3 crowns representing Druidism. On the picture on the top right, the tail of the lion is very serpentine-like, representing the dragon bloodline. The flag of Wales. Wales was known as the place of the strangers or the foreigners, signifying those who invaded and settled from abroad, probably from France. Here's the standard of Scotland. An early Habsburg dynasty crest is behind it, strikingly similar to that of King William I in the 12th century, whose red lion became the standard of Scotland. It also resembles the arms of King Richard, the famous lion-hearted, and many other heraldic devices of English kings and nobles. Now, regardless of the ages that pass and of the dynasties which come and go, the symbols remain conspicuously similar. Here we have the cult of Aton red lion on the flag of Scotland. A symbol of the sign of Leo, it refers to the royal dynasties of Egypt. The fleurs-de-lis are incorporated probably to commemorate the arrival of the Knights Templar from France. They may also connote visitations much earlier in history. Here we have the standard of the Prince of Wales. We showed it in part 1. And we emphasize that at his coronation, Charles sat upon a throne bearing a red dragon emblem. His mother spoke these words over him: "This dragon gives you your power, your throne, and your authority." Well, he certainly took it to his head, because in 1992, Charles petitioned the European Union to be made king of all Europe. These guys really are legends in their own minds, and they might be ruling over you if they get their way. Here we have the flag of the Church of Scotland, bearing a mosaic burning bush. The picture on the right shows you the three roots. And this cross is also meant to symbolize, the cross and the flag is meant to symbolize number 10, just like in the Roman numerals. Here we have the Plantagenet crest. This is a French dynasty that ended up being kings of England. The red dragon is in the center. So close to the one, it's so close to the one mentioned cryptically by Queen Elizabeth. This is the arms of the Habsburg and Habsburg-Lorraine dynasties of Europe. And we heard about them in part 1. We heard about Charles de Lorraine, and we also discovered that this Charles de Lorraine, a French Knights Templar, a very important king, a very important noble. His brother was also a lord, a king. We find out that this Charles de Lorraine was married to the Habsburg. His wife was a member of the Habsburgs dynasty. Now this is one of their coats of arms, very similar to it. And to whom the Habsburg, Queen Elizabeth, is related to the Habsburgs. She's called Windsor, but she's related to the Habsburgs. The dragon bloodline has been preserved in the Merovingian, Carolingian, Tudor, Plantagenet, Stuart, Habsburgs, Hanoverian, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, Guelph, Bowes-Lyon, Battenberg, which was later itself changed to Mountbatten, and the Guise and Savoy families, as well as many others. The Merovingians may have derived their title from the word for the sea, or from Mer, meaning pyramid, and also high ones. The powerful Plantagenet kings of England were a part of the Angevin dynasty of France, and were also known as the House of Anjou. They were, like the Bourbons and House of Orleans, a branch of the Capetian dynasty of Europe, and the word Capet means the big heads, or the chiefs. Here we have the royal arms of England, the Queen's personal emblem. Note the Druidic bardic harp that appears, as well as the Egyptian lions. During the coronation of British monarchs, the following words from Handel's Zadok the Priest are sung. Zadok the Priest and Nathan crowned King Solomon. During the coronation of the Queen, King Solomon is mentioned, Zadok is mentioned. Who was Zadok? Who are the Zadokites? Have they any connection to Egypt? In the Irish Origins books we explain that absolutely that is the case. And moreover, that Solomon is not necessarily a person. Of course, Solomon has been traced back to various pharaohs, to Thutmose III and so on. In the book we have a detailed description of which biblical figures correspond to which members of Egyptian dynasties, in the same way that we pointed out in part 1 that Akhenaten is connected to Moses. But if we look at the symbols of the lion and the unicorn, we find out that the unicorn represents the servants of the lion, the Judites. The white unicorn represents those who are the minions of, the lackeys of, the lieutenants of. The lion is on the other side representing the royals, the Atenists, because these elites, they must have servants in order to gain their power. Every coterie, every criminal organization operates hierarchically. So the standard that you see of the Queen of England, that you see so many times with the lion and the unicorn, not only represents the steering committee, the big chiefs, symbolized by the Atenist red lion of Leo and also of Aries, but also the pale white unicorn representing the house of Judah, representing those who are the disciples, the followers, and the pages and exons, the ones who carry out the duties that are handed down by that executive of power. Here we have the crest of the Knights Templar, featuring the same lion and unicorn motif that appears on so many royal coats of arms. These are Atenist symbols. The crown above the cross is pharaonic. The red cross can be found on prehistoric Phoenician and British megaliths. The cross and the crown are also employed by American Scottish Rite Freemasons who work in secret to undermine the sovereignty of America on behalf of their Atenist chiefs in London and Rome. The kings of the Merovingian dynasty were believed to have been born with birthmarks in the form of a cross. We showed in part 1 that the Rothschild crest, the crest of the Rothschilds, is markedly royal in appearance. Of course, the Rothschilds weren't royal. Official history, biographies even that they have commissioned, clearly point out that they were penniless people that lived in the ghetto in Frankfurt on Main. But their symbol is practically identical to those used by the British royals. Here we have 3 interesting pictures. One of Albert Pike, the famous Freemason, one of Al Gore, and one of the tele-evangelist, Pat Robertson. And their hand is clenched in the form of what's known in Masonry as the lion's paw. Again, stressing the whole idea to be symbolically literate. This Pat Robertson puts himself forward as an evangelist, as a Christian, but check out his lineage. Check out how he's funded, where his money goes. Follow the checks. And the same thing applies to so many other people in the media and in positions of government and so on. Now in 1 Peter 5 verse 8 we read, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." Is this a reference to the Atenists? Tony Bushby, in his Secret in the Bible, says, "The lion was a symbol for the first degrees of initiation, the sign which allowed the opening of a book, so to speak. It possibly represented the royalty of initiation, the status that comes with being aware of what is concealed." Here we have a crest from Europe showing everything. Druidic oak leaves, 13 on each side, a Masonic checkerboard motif, lions' heads, a trinity of Druidic bars, the double cross of Lorraine, a phoenix, and an Atenist crown with pyramids. The double cross of Lorraine is, in our estimation, a composite symbol indicating Jesus, the Christ, and the Christ before him, namely Akhenaten, who is symbolized by the lions and the crown at the top. Akhenaten is also the phoenix who rose from the ashes after the banishment from Egypt. The fact that the design is embraced by Irish oak leaves is also most suggestive. Here we have the logo for Trinity Broadcasting Network. Again, we see the lion, the unicorn, the dove. The dove stands for the Davids, and the Irish zodiacal sun cross. Now, Christian anti-Masons cannot understand why Masons employ what appears to be Christian symbolism. They have to discover that the Christ referenced in Masonic works is not their Jesus, but a previous monotheist, namely Akhenaten of Egypt. This is the reason why the cross is used alongside the rose and or the crown. Here we see the doves on the standards of the British royals. It's a cryptogram for the Davids, the commanders of the cult of Aton. It also appears on Visa credit cards and on corporations like Greenpeace and then political organizations like Sinn Féin. Also, we can note the Malta crosses. These Malta crosses have been used by the Nazis, but they can be found on Babylonian and Sumerian and Hittite and Gothic and Phoenician symbols, stonework, friezes and murals and so on. Here's the standard of the Belgian kings, showing 3 lions. Belgium is important because at the Bank of Belgium, the so-called rivals, the Stuarts and the House of Orange, kept their accounts. The Windsor family have dynastic ties to this important Masonic Atenist country. And my colleague Andrew Power pointed out that the whole Battle of the Boyne, which is ostensibly fought between these rival groups of Protestants and Catholics, Stuarts and the Orange men, the House of Orange, King William I. He pointed out that you can take as many metal detectors down there to the Battle of Boyne as you like, and you're not going to find even so much as a button or a belt buckle or a bullet or a musket or anything. His point was that there was no real physical battle there. In part 1 we talked about omission, that one of the devices of control and to create confusion and to skew history is omission? Well, there's certainly a big omission in Irish history. That at the place where a colossal historical battle was meant to be fought, with hundreds of dead, not a single metal piece has been discovered to show that any kind of battle took place there. And Andrew Power discovered that the whole thing was ritual. The whole thing was based on astrotheology. And that as soon as King William's horse entered the river, one of the great planets, Jupiter, or I can't remember which, was crossing the Milky Way. That the lion and the unicorn were there. Not on Earth, but in the sky. The lion and the unicorn, Cancer and Leo. And in artwork, he showed that the King William's horse represents with the sword between its ears. You step back from the canvas and you think it's the unicorn. That even King Billy on his horse, with his sword between the ears of the horse, is subliminally meant to look like the sign for Cancer. We're talking royal houses here, astrology and astronomy. Here's the coat of arms of the House of Hesse. This house is related to the House of Orange. They were funders and promoters of the Rothschild dynasty. The colors red, white, blue and black are of the Temple of Solomon. And let us reiterate that Solomon need not be a human being. When the Masons are talking Solomon or Sol Aton, they're referring to Aton the sun. They're referring to mystery school traditions and teachings. It's a title, not of one man, but of many chieftains, many commanders, just like David. In fact, many could say that even Joshua or Jesus are titles, not personal names. Here's the standard, the coat of arms of the Rothschild dynasty. They're not of royal blood, but they've served the Venetian and Hanoverian royals, from whom their power derives. Above his door, Amschel Rothschild displayed the sun eagle of Aton with 5 arrows in its claw, a nearly identical symbol to that now found on the US $1 bill. The monuments to the Catholic Stuart dynasty of Scotland and England is in Rome. The Stuarts were one of the many dragon dynasties ruling the world. The word Stuart means steward, signifying those who rule in place of another, or who officiate for another higher and more elusive authority. Interestingly, the Stuarts were known as the Jacobite kings, this of course refers to the father of the Israelites, Jacob. The father of the Israelites, the father of the Atonists. The British flag is today referred to as the Union Jack for the same reason. Another Stuart symbol was the white rose. The Stuarts were powerful Freemasons, negating the idea that Catholicism is against such secret societies. The Stuart treasure was lodged in the same Belgian bank that kept the accounts of their on-paper Protestant enemy, the Hanoverian King William of Orange, as we said. William had more Stuart blood in him than James Stuart did. His own wife, Mary, was sister of James Stuart. The Stuarts only appeared to be deposed. It was James I who commissioned the King James Bible. James I was suggestively referred to as Jacob or Jacobus, hence the Jacobin period of English history. That's right. King William and his wife had more Stuart blood in them than James Stuart, the Catholic they were trying to overthrow. The Battle of Boyne was nothing more than a ritual, a ceremonial handing over of power. It's all on paper. It's all scripted for TV. It's scripted for the history books, and people accept this. It doesn't matter to a Freemason whether you're Catholic or Protestant, Jewish or Christian, Islamic or Jewish. That's for the marketplace. In the silence of the sanctum, in the silence of the tabernacle, in the inner chambers, where they shake hands and dance on their desks and clink their glasses and chuckle, and they go up to the battlements and look down at the rest of the circus. They know the truth. There's only one God to worship. There's only one law, one world order. The Stuarts, like their close relatives, the Tudors, had close connections to the French Templars. Indeed, the French fleur-de-lis appears on most English heraldry, as we said. These royal dynasties had been exposed to Druidism via the Chaldean monks from Ireland. The name James, from the Gaelic Seamus, meant gatekeeper or guardian in the Egyptian language. In Egyptian, it is also known as Shamar or Shemez, It may also relate to Shemsu, meaning disciple or follower, in this case, disciple of Aton. Lawrence Gardner, in Bloodline of the Holy Grail, writes, in Britain, during their later exile, the Stuart kings were at the very forefront of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which was founded on the most ancient of all arcane knowledge and universal law. Their Breton heritage was closely allied to the noble families of Boulogne and Jerusalem, and their background was largely Templar-inspired. We turn again to the Caesars of Rome. These are creators of a worldwide empire that subjugated the nations and decimated tribes. The Romans dominated Egypt for 400 years, from the time of Augustus in 30 BC to 395 BC. Their empire was colossally wealthy. Many emperors were distinguished by terms and titles such as Divi Filius, meaning Son of God. They considered themselves supreme gods and kings of the known world. There was no room in their world for a reluctant Jewish Messiah of obscure heritage. The Jesus of St. Paul and of Rome was a clever frontman for someone who, like the very Caesars, had a very definite heritage and who also aspired to the creation of a new world order, to replace one that was lost. The Roman Jupiter, Ammon, was a version of the ancient Egyptian sun god Amun, or Amun-Ra. Julius Caesar was deified in the temple of Ammon, and afterwards he was considered a living god. The word Caesar, from Caesar or Caesar, gives us the word Caesarean, meaning to be severed and removed from the womb or mother. The word originally meant the sun, and has the same meaning as other elite titles such as Sa, which meant Orion or Osiris, Sira, the title the Egyptians used for Pharaoh, Shah, which we find is the Arabic for king, Sera, which means princess, Sahib, Tsar, or Tsar, the Russian emperors, words like shaman, Surya, sire, seer, and sir, all represent the sun. Emperors up to Constantine portrayed Sol Invictus on their official coinage, with the legend Soli Invicto Comiti, thus claiming the unconquered sun as the companion to the emperor. In other words, the Roman Caesars, the bishops of Rome, all worship the sun. The statuettes of Sol Invictus, carried by the standard bearers, appear in 3 places in reliefs on the Arch of Constantine. Now, Constantine's official coinage continues to bear legends relating to Sol Invictus until about 323 AD. Constantine decreed, in March 7th, 321, Dies Solis, Day of the Sun. That's Sunday, as the Roman day of rest. In fact, the religion of Sol Invictus continued to be part of the state religion until paganism was abolished by a decree of Theodosius the First on February 27th, 1390, or 390. February 27th, 390. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not suitable for grain growing or vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. So the emperors who decreed that Sunday would be the day of rest were doing so because they were sun worshippers. James Bonwick, in his book Irish Druids and Old Irish Religions, published in 1894, said, when the Christians assaulted the Osirian temple at Alexandria and with destructive force entered its sacred precincts, they saw a huge cross occupying the marble pavement. Great, too, was the surprise of the Spaniards to find the same emblem in the churches of Aboriginal America. The Tau or cross meets one's view in the ornamental relics of many lands. Godfrey Higgins, in Celtic Druids, published in 1830, wrote, few causes have been more powerful in producing mistakes in ancient history than the idea, hastily formed by all ages, that every monument of antiquity marked with a cross or with any of those symbols which they conceived to be monograms of Christ were of Christian origin. The cross is as common in India as in Egypt or Europe. Hargrave Jennings, in a book called The Masculine Cross and Ancient Sex Worship, 1874, said that the rabbis say that when Aaron was made high priest, he was marked on the forehead by Moses with the figure of an X. This is the same X, the same cross that we find on the heraldry, on the coats of arms, and even on the flags. It is still preserved today. As seen on the flag of St. George, the Ulster flag, and the Union Jack of England, the Red Cross has a very old history going back to Egypt and the worship of the god Set, who was connected with the colors red and blue. An ancient name for Egypt was Morai, and the hieroglyphic for this word featured a circle and cross identical to those seen on many flags and emblems of the world, particularly those of Britain. The word Mor, or Mer, also referred directly to the Giza pyramid and to the keepers of the knowledge of the pyramid. And we saw in part 1 that the Mor, or Mer, gives rise to the Merovingians, a very powerful dynasty. And of course, wouldn't those Merovingians then be using the symbol of the Egyptian serpent? Wouldn't they be using the symbol of the sun? Wouldn't they be using the symbol of the pyramid? So today when we find massive corporations, not only the architecture of the buildings of these corporations shaped with pyramidical designs, but when we find these pyramids on the symbols of banks and of insurance agencies and powerful corporations, when we find it in the technical world and the technical corporations, and symbols of the serpent, and symbols of ancient symbols out of the Bible, out of the scriptures, are these the insignias and emblems of the elites who've bought and paid for these corporations and who secretly run them from behind closed doors? The Red Cross, therefore, it is a word, Merovingian, connects two secret societies in their knowledge. Expert on Egypt, Ralph Ellis, has discovered that there may be good reason why the craft lodge of Freemasonry is known as the Blue Lodge, and why Freemasonry have blue degrees, and why it is that blue is used by the super elite order known as the Knights of the Garter, founded by King Edward III in 1348, and presently headed by the Queen of England. Ellis has shown that there is a connection between the legendary St. George, the dragon slayer, and the god Set, who also entered into combat with the serpent Apophis, using a spear to overcome his serpentine adversary. One of the meanings of the Egyptian word Set is garter. The name also means secret. Like the ancient worshippers of Set, and like the Egyptian nobility, the Knights of the Garter wear a blue-colored band upon their person. It is usually hidden from view or kept secret. But a look at the symbolism of various corporations and government bodies reveals much use of this blue ribbon or blue band or tie. A master mason is bestowed a jewel upon a blue ribbon. St. Michael is a variation of St. George. In Egyptian, the name Michael is Makel, meaning blue. The knightly connection is made sensible when it is realized that the god Set was often the tutelary deity for commanders in the Egyptian military. He was considered a god of war and conflict. He presided over the hot red deserts and over storms and natural disasters. In Egyptian, a title for Set was Djuji. This is the probable origin of the name adopted by so many British kings, George. The name refers directly to the god Set, and Set had been the original god of the Hyksos dynasty, who later became followers of Akhenaten and his Atenists. It appears that the flag of England, that contains the Setian red cross and blue background, is nothing less than an Atenist flag, pure and simple. The pharaonic crown of Lower Egypt, the area dominated by the Hyksos, was known as the Deshret, or the Red Crown. Of course, Egyptologists know all about Set, and Set is in fact often considered a god of evil. Probably we can interpret it a little bit better than that. Probably we can say that it's not that Set himself, the god, actually represented evil, but that he was the god of the evil ones. when we understand the nature of the Hyksos people, we might find that it's because those people were so despised and so hated, that the God that they worshipped is not so much the God of evil, but the God of the evil ones. Now, ergo, it is not St. George who is the patron saint of England then, but Set of the Hyksos. In general terms, whenever the code term red is used in the Old Testament, it denotes the Hyksos dynasty. Connected to the Order of the Garter is the most distinguished order of St. Michael and St. George, formed in 1818. Additionally, legend has it that the senior members of the Merovingian dynasty of France, and these are founders of the Knights Templar order, had birthmarks in the shape of a red cross. Madame Helena Blavatsky, in her Isis Unveiled, says, archaeological explorations have indicated him, that's St. Michael, as identical with Anubis, whose effigy was lately discovered upon an Egyptian monument, with a cuirass and holding a spear, like St. Michael and St. George. He is also represented as slaying a dragon that has the head of a serpent. Here we have the Nazis, and we notice that the Nazis and their Masonic Atonist solar eagle. Hitler, Himmler, and the other Nazi agents of the British Crown never ceased to refer to themselves as the New Templars. Appropriating and misusing the sacred title of Aryan, they distorted and obscured the true meaning of this term that signified the Druids, or the elders, the wise and perfected men of any race. Adolf Hitler, a British Atonist agent, is here seen with King Edward VII of the Windsor family. The Windsors are of German and Venetian ancestry. Sir Oswald Mosley, the leader of Britain's fascist party during the Second World War years, was related to the Windsor royals. Greg Hallett, the author of Hitler Was a British Agent, has exposed the connections between the Nazis and the British Crown. In his Mein Kampf, Hitler hypocritically professed hatred for the world's aristocracy. When it comes to contradictions of history, they're without end. And here we have one. We showed earlier the similarity between the tunics of the Judahites is exactly the colors of the Nazi flag. Here we find out that Hitler, who's nothing more than a British agent, employed, like his henchmen, Karl Haushofer and Rudolf Hess, all employees of the British Crown, the British aristocrats. But all the way through the book Mein Kampf, he's complaining and threatening and implicating the so-called aristocrats of Germany. What duplicity! What lies! Now we turn to Zoroaster and Zoroastrianism. It's a solar cult mystery religion that developed in Persia around 1200 BC, shortly after the time of the removal of Akhenaten from Egypt. This solar-based religion is uncannily similar to Atonism. It preceded Christianity. Zoroaster may have been the prototype for Paul's Jesus. Zoroastrianism was important under the Sassanid Empire of Persia, or modern Iran. It is not known whether Zoroaster was a historical figure. Dates for his existence vary widely, anything from 2000 BC to 458 BC. Now the term Zoro means golden, and it's close to Sura or Surya, meaning the sun. Zoroaster is taken to mean golden star. He is considered the creator of the Magi, who really go back much further, and who had Western origins. Zoroastrianism plays a role in the Masonic tradition. The god Zoroaster was known as Ormuzd or Ormuzd, or as Ahura Mazda, the god of light. Apparently he was a version of Horus, Amun-Ra, and Aton. In Mozart's Masonic opera, The Magic Flute, the character Sarstro was portrayed as the fount of all wisdom. Then we turn to the cult of Mithras. This is a Hellenistic solar cult that thrived in the 2nd century BC during the time of the Roman Empire. It particularly attracted men from the Roman military and was very popular among Romans in general. The sun god Mithras, or Mithra, overcomes the bull of Taurus. Mithras represents the sun moving from the sign of Taurus into Aries. This astrological phase shift had obsessed Akhenaten and his Atenists. Their god was the sun, and the sun's relative position in the heavens mattered greatly to his watchers. We can refer you to the Irish Origins Appendix number 9 and to the book Terror and the Illuminati by David Livingstone that explores these other sun cults. Of course, in part 1 we noted that after the expulsion of Akhenaten he simply didn't disappear, nor did the Atenists disappear, as most historians believe. After the 17th year of Akhenaten's reign he's meant to have just faded away and died. Nefertiti disappears into the wild blue yonder, and basically we hear nothing more. Of course, the trail didn't end there. The trail moved west. The story is that the Hyksos, they have been rewritten as the Israelites and the Judites of biblical history. But it's also interesting that after the time of Akhenaten's expulsion, various other very similar cults of the sun, solar cult type groups and belief systems start appearing. And we need to bear these in mind, because they could be Atonism under different forms. The Atonists are royals, nobles. They'd be welcomed into Babylon by people there. They would have colleagues from the very first Exodus at the beginning of the 18th dynasty. The Exodus we were addressing in part 1 was a later Exodus, during the latter part of the 18th dynasty, at the time of Akhenaten. But hundreds of years before this, at the beginning of the 18th dynasty, was another mass exodus of Hyksos. And we go into that in our work. So these original Hyksos people who had already been removed from Egypt would have been welcoming Akhenaten and his coterie with open arms. And they may have found homes in Syria, in nearby Babylon, in Greece and Rome. We can be assured of this. So Akhenaten and his Hyksos, these so-called Judites and Israelites of the Bible, would not have been wandering in any desert for 40 years. They would have been immediately greeted and warmly welcomed by their colleagues, by their family members, and by other colleagues that they had throughout the world. We have estimated that they were connected to the Scythian race. They may have been connected to the Amorites and the Cretans and the Minoans. So these people would have found homes. And therefore, not wanting to lose their empire again, we find various Roman cults of the sun appearing. In fact, we find Christianity appearing and Judaism appearing. But could not also Zoroastrianism and Mithraism be part of this trunk? Could they not be branches of the trunk of Atonism? We've already established that Christianity is, that Judaism is, that Irish Chaldeanism is, that Templarism is, that Freemasonry is. So we have the main trunk and we have all the little branches and twigs to bear in mind also. During the time when the sun made its transit from Taurus into Aries, Egyptian priests were at odds. Some wished to continue with the old paradigm while others hailed the change. The scene at Mount Sinai, in which the chosen people build a golden calf, cryptically refers to the schism in the ranks. The cult of Mithras was not so much different from Sol Invicti cult, to which the Emperor Constantine belonged, and both cults were, in our mind, variants of Egyptian Atonism. Here is a photograph of Aton, D.C. Because Washington, D.C.'s White House is nothing more than a new capital for Atonism. The Egyptian symbolism in the city design should leave us in no doubt of this. However, the symbolism is not, as most researchers estimate, merely Masonic or Zionist, but Atonist. The White House. Now it shares the same name as the new government center in Moscow. The name originally comes from Egypt. The white and red houses of the late First Dynasty were departments that officiated for the will of Pharaoh. The second most important state building in Egypt was the treasury. It was known as the Per Hetch, meaning the White House. Michael Rice, in his book Who's Who in Ancient Egypt, wrote, "The office rendered as Chamberlain was responsible for all public functions undertaken by the king and for the management of his affairs. The Chancellor attested from the First Dynasty directed all the concerns of government with Egypt's wealth. the collection of taxes and the control of the treasuries of the two lands. Theoretically, and sometimes in fact, there were two treasuries, one for each of the kingdoms, known as the White House and the Red House, for Upper and Lower Egypt respectively. Each had its dependent bureaucracy under officials who reported to the chancellor, who in turn reported to the vizier. That's right, the White House and the Red House. They're Egyptian. Here's the picture of the so-called Laurel Room at Camp David. The leaders, or more correctly misleaders, go up on the hill to plot and plan. The hill is fundamental Egyptian symbol of power. It is an Atnas symbol, not a Jewish one, although it was co-opted by the Zionists. References to the pyramidical hill appear in the Old Testament. For instance, Micah 4, verse 2-3. And many nations shall come, and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, Zion, to the house of the God of Jacob, that's Israel. And he may teach us his ways, and we will walk, we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge between many people, and shall decide for nations far off. In fact, the book of Micah, the word Micah, means those who are unique. Well, the Atnas were certainly that. Now, Camp David does not refer to King David, as most will erroneously believe. It refers to the Davids, or commanders of Aton, to the biological and ideological bloodline of Akhenaten. A secondary connotation of the word David is to divide. The Atnists are certainly experts at creating division. Divide and rule has been both an apt motto and a method for them in their interminable war for global domination. In Leviticus 25, verse 44-46, your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves, and you may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property, and you can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Well, it's a manifesto. It's a political document to show how you conquer nations, how you rape their women, murder their cattle, enslave the men. This is the manifesto of the Atnists. This is what the Bible is, nothing more than the Chronicle or the Book of the Pharaohs. It's a manual for building a perfect New World Order. Isaiah 62, verse 1, For Zion's sake I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake I will not remain quiet, till her righteousness shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch. Aliens shall stand and feed your flocks, says Isaiah 61. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers, but you shall be called priests of the Lord. Men will speak of you as ministers of our God. Isaiah 60. Foreigners will build your walls, and their kings will serve you. Your gates will always stand open. They will never be shut, day or night, so that men may bring you the wealth of the nations. This is Akhenaten's new kingdom. This is the New World Order. This is the new Israel, the new Zion. What was lost in ages past, in the old world disorder, will be rebuilt again in the New World Order. Those words appear on the American dollar bill. The Judaic Atnist eagle and the Egyptian pyramid of Aton appear on the $1 bill. Washington, D.C.'s design should leave us in no doubt that what is being built here is a new empire of the sun, into which all people will be debt slaves. There can be no resistance. There can be no let-up. The image of Paramount Pictures here is interesting. This logo cryptically depicts Mount Sinai and the 22 arcana, or stars, of the stellar cult. It was at Sinai that the cult of Aton recuperated after their expulsion from Egypt. Para is a word meaning beyond. Paramount simply means beyond the mountain, and is symbolic reference to our times, our historical times, the times beyond or after, the time of Sinai. The symbol above is also a cryptic reference to the three great pyramids of Giza. Here we have the image for Columbia pictures. This is an astrological image connoting the sign of Virgo. The word Columbia means dove and refers surreptitiously to the Davids, that is, to the elites of the cult of Aton. The U.S. Statue of Liberty is an Egyptian symbol that also connotes this cult of Aton, the true owners and rulers of America. The star that the statue is erected upon symbolizes Sirius. At The Hague, in Holland, the previous seat of the EU government, stands a huge black widow-like spider. Spider webs are seen on the US dollar bill, on Mormon architecture, at the so-called Nazca lines in Peru, and on obelisks and civic buildings. It represents the force of darkness that spins the webs of deceit to entrap minds and souls. In the web of the spider, the trapped victim strangles itself through its very attempt to be free. Of course, the point is well made that if you don't know what you're doing and your rival, your enemy, is smarter than you are, and you don't know how the game works, you could end up trying to get free and imprison yourself all the more. This is what has been happening to the brothers and sisters in the past, who have little knowledge. As the poet Alexander Pope said so wisely, "Drink it or touch it not, the Pyrenean spring. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing." We're dealing with people who have great knowledge. We're dealing with adepts, corrupt as they may be, but slimy and intelligent and ruthless. So it takes a certain kind of knowledge, as we've been saying all throughout this presentation. It takes a certain kind of understanding of the way the world works. It takes us to go up to the high windows, to the high balcony, and look over the whole of creation, the whole of the world. We have to start seeing, instead of one square on the board, try and get a glimpse of the whole board game. Try to get that sense of clairvoyance and understanding. Develop it slowly through pattern recognition and symbolic literacy. Slowly getting your arms around the information, slowly accruing all the facts, until you start getting an idea of this spider and how it works. Here's the original symbol of the Dodge Company of America. We've been talking about the takeover America and how the various corporations are employing this Masonic symbolism and Atonist symbolism. Well, the car company's original logo prominently featured Judaic or Atonist star of the Davids. Now that's been replaced with the Martian ram's head in blood red colors. And we emphasize, of course, that the ram is the symbol of Aries, which was sacred to the god Aton and to the Atonists. ABC Towers, a media network area in Los Angeles. Significantly, the building of this media leviathan are shaped, both buildings and they're shaped like two equilateral triangles. Well, two such triangles interwoven make a Star of David again, the emblem used by the commanders and officers of Aton. Here we have Nabisco and the Neotech organization. We're just examining these logos. Like so many corporations and institutions of the world, these company logos prominently feature Masonic emblems and symbols. The Cross of Lorraine and the pyramid have been incorporated into both designs. And this symbol can be found throughout the corporate world. And of course the Nabisco symbol there also incorporates the pyramid. We talked about Lorraine. We talked about Charles de Lorraine and how instrumental he was, a figure in the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, and also the Illuminati. And that how instrumental he was influencing Adam Weishaupt, who went on to influence the founding fathers of America. And of course, in homage almost, these dignitaries, these elevated ones, begin using these symbols of these ancient dynasties and these ancient royal houses of Europe. Here's a couple of other examples. Philip Morris with a very royal style coat of arms featuring a lion and unicorn. The Marlboro Corporation using the pyramid and even the removable capstone. Their packs feature the Egyptian pyramid, but if you open the lid of the box, it's like removing the capstone of the pyramid. Is this just coincidence? We would do well to question the identity of these dynastic concerns who've made fortunes importing and purveying tobacco, sugar, caffeine, opium and mercury. We mentioned in part 1 about the Atlantis book and the appendices, Appendix F, which contains a thorough look at the purveyors of these stimulants. Valdemar Valerian, his master chronology, taking you through the centuries, taking you through the years, to paint a picture that is absolutely incredible. But you can look at it and see the objective proof. Don't take anybody's word for it. The chronology, the purveyance, the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company, the Virginia Company. These concerns, these dynastic concerns, even in the corporate world, who've made fortunes out of suffering and misery, and the advertising concerns that made it all possible. Aton in your face. That's right. We've seen it. It's in plain sight. Nothing is hidden. The missing capstone of the pyramid is missing because it represents the exiled Akhenaten. The descendants of this renegade infidel have, in retaliation, desecrated the land of Egypt, both its temple sites and its true history. Their agents have also seen to it that the ancient connections between Egypt and Ireland have been obscured. Only now, in our time, are the facts arising to the surface. Our revelations concerning the Irish origins of civilization also involve the exposure, for the first time, of the true origins of the secret societies and the reason for the symbolism they employ. We show why knees have bent and why heads have bowed before the world system and its elusive creators. There it is, the eagle. The eagle is the shield in front of it. America with the stars and stripes, protecting the Atonists, a home for the Atonists. This eagle is a symbol of the so-called tribe of Manasseh, named after a son of Joseph, the Pharaoh's dream analyst and the man with the coat of many colors, which of course refers to the zodiac. In reality, Joseph was Yuya, the wealthiest man in the world during the time of the Pharaoh Thutmosis IV. Yuya held the highest office and was probably connected to the Hyksos kings of Egypt. He was one of the 12 so-called brothers, but that's a cryptic reference to his priestly or Masonic rank. He was second in command after the pharaoh of his time. In Egyptian and Hindi, the word Akka, like an Akhenaten, means eye. The hierogram for the word Akem or Akka was the eagle. The eye and the eagle, which appear on the dollar bill, are therefore closely related as symbols and have been symbols of royalty, especially of Egyptian royalty. The name Akhenaton means eye of Aton. Manasseh is therefore a cover term and idea for the Atonists and their conquest of America. From a book called Tracing the Ancestors of Great Britain and America, by the Gospel of the Kingdom Ministry, we read, Manasseh would become a great nation. The greatest nation in the history of the world is the United States of America. So these Atonists and those they've controlled and also those they've confused, which makes up for a good deal of the Christian movement, especially these right-wing evangelist types, who are either in the pay of the Zionists or the pay of the Sionists, the pay of the Templars and secret societies. As we've shown throughout this whole presentation, all these surface movements and charities and organizations all link back. Well, they are convinced that America is, of course, the new empire. Akhenaten wanted to replace an empire that was lost. Britain, the empire upon which the sun never sets. And then from Britain the move towards taking America, colonizing America. Now, according to cryptic metaphorical histories of the British Israelites, Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are the ancestors of the races guided by God to found Britain and America. The sons are, however, merely fictive devices. They are just two of many non-historical biblical characters scripted to impersonate the chiefs of the cult of Aton, who speak only in symbols to the world they stage manage from behind the scenes. The misunderstood motto above the Egyptian pyramid, at which the Judaic Aton's eagle stares, is Annuit Coeptus, meaning he favors our undertaking. The he is not God, but Akhenaten, and or his god Aton. The new order of the Atonists is to replace the old order over which they reigned in Egypt of old. Now the shield is shown in front of the eagle protecting it. The stars and stripes, which represent America, are literally a shield for the eagle, that is, for the cult of Akhenaten, and for Aton. The motto, E pluribus unum, meaning from the many, one, is a clear reference to the one big star created from the 13 others. The 14th star corresponds to the 14th and highest cornerstone of the pyramid, also seen on the American $1 bill. The star is not Judaic, in the sense learned and accepted today. It is the royal star of David, that is the house of Aton. The arrows represent the militaristic faction of the cult, while the olive branches represent the theocratic or religious faction. The eagle faces left, and that represents the past or the history that has been before. The term star was used in the earliest times by hardline Essenes and Jews in reference to their lineage of messianic leaders. These men were not thought to have come from God. They were merely tribal or clan leaders in line from David. The nine tail feathers represent the 9 degrees of the Illuminist or Atonist lodges. The famous symbol of the compass and the rule. This design has a subliminal property of being configured like the letter A, which stands for Akhenaten and for Aton. It is often shown with sun rays, along with a 5-pointed star of Sirius. The chief Masonic motto is Per me regis regnant, which means through me kings reign. We might now know who this me is. We also see the letter G, in mostly an uppercase, along with the Masonic compass and rule. The letter G, rendered in lowercase, however, appears to be serpentine in form. This is another reason why it is employed by the descendants of the so-called Dragon Court or Brotherhood of the Snake. Many kings were known as George, with a G at the beginning, and the Red Cross of England is also known as St. George's Cross. Now, Akhenaten referred to himself as the architect. That is a term well known to Masons. Their supreme archon is known as the grand architect of the universe. The word carpenter, from Setepenri, the Egyptian word Setepenri, was also a title used by the Egyptian pharaohs. In Greek, the word for carpenter, poiamen, means king's counselors. So it's anything but the humble carpenter that we envision when we listen to all those romantic Bible stories of Joseph and Jesus hammering and sawing and pieces of wood in their workshop and all of that kind of palaver. Nothing could be further than the truth. The Bible is loaded, as we showed in part 1, with cover terms and code meanings and code words. There's so many of them. Here we see the President Harry S. Truman, the insidious and treacherous 33rd President of America, wearing his Masonic diadem in the shape of the letter A for Aton. Of course, Truman was a major Zionist and one of the most perfidious creatures to ever appear in American history. We can also study the Masonic degrees. You can go to Masonic lodges and pick them up in their brochures and folders. These, we also see that the beginning stages are 3. And as we pointed out in part 1 of this program, the number 3 is Druidic. The number 3 was sacred to the Druids. The Druids divided their order that way. So did the Ammonists of Egypt. And we note basically the prevalence of Egyptian symbolism. The pyramid is seen there in that image, shaped like a letter A. There's the Druidic zodiacal or zodiacal arch. There's the compass and rule of Aton. And then there's the sunrise, the rays of the sun above the pyramid. The word Aton actually refers to the new sun at the eastern horizon, to be specific. The 33 degrees is based on the 33 degrees that the sun, that's Aton, must pass while resident in one sign of the zodiac. 33 represents the degrees of a single sign of the zodiac. For the sun to pass through the whole of the 30 degrees of a sign, and then a little bit more for the sun. The sun is also, has a certain size. So for the sun to enter in, pass through, and completely leave a sign, it's about 33 degrees. This is why it's sacred to those modern solar cultists, people like the Freemasons. A good student is given a degree today when he's ready to serve his Masonic God. Aton, Jehovah, Lucifer. The fact that the most students of the world don't know that doesn't change the fact of the matter. Now, Masonic degrees bear Hebrew, or what we might want to call, for argument's sake, Hebrew titles. Higher degrees bear tags such as Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret, Knight of the Sun, Grand Pontiff, Prince of the Tabernacle, Knight Commander of the Temple, Knight of St. Andrew, and Andrew is nothing more than a rendition of the Aryan Indra, etc. As we show, these terms are Egyptian in origin. Our work is the first to reveal the true origins and purpose of Freemasonry. This G that they use stands for the Gaionim, the elites of the Atonists. The lowercase g is a sigil for the serpent and the knowledge preserved by members of the ancient dragon bloodline. The first lines of the opening verse from Akhenaten's own hymn to Aten, this is composed by Akhenaten himself, that became the basis of the Old Testament's Song of Solomon. The first lines are, At daybreak, when thou arisest on the horizon, when thou shinest as the Aton by day, thou drivest away the darkness, and givest thy rays. Again, one more anecdote showing the incredible connections between Judeo-Christianity and old Egyptian Atonism. So when this maniac Akhenaten is referred to as the Christ before the Christ, and the world's first humanist, and the world's first individualist, and the first monotheist, there's so much truth to that in a way. It's just that what we're dealing with is not normal solar cultism. It's a warped and vile, skewed branch. Its founder was a maniac, and the subsequent religions are of a maniacal form. Hence the state of the world today. Here we see a logo of the Gene Trust with the lowercase g, which is subliminally the serpent, and which also stands for the Gaionim, these elites, these Masonic elites. I wrote that by way of their control over the major pharmaceutical leviathans, this poison-peddling order can have the masses of the world made sicker and more infirm on all levels. And the evidence of this enterprise of human destruction can be seen all around us. The symbolism employed by most of these corrupt edifices is enough to alert us to their perfidious agendas. Through their agents in the media, that's Henry Luce, Sumner Redstone, Ted Turner, Rupert Murdoch, Conrad Black, Catherine Graham, etc., they make sure that the world's uninformed masses remain that way. By disseminating a daily diet of pornographic images and perverse subliminal messages, deeply disturbing to man's libido and psyche, they contaminate the world with their noetic infections. It is partly due to this psychic dictatorship that the average man lacks the passion and inclination for anything other than the pursuit of sensual gratification and personal narcissistic titillation. What do we read in Exodus 19? You have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. What is encrypted in that? What does it mean? Can anyone be born on eagle's wings? God is sending an eagle to bring his child home? Well, is it a double-headed eagle, perhaps? This double-headed eagle can be seen today prominently displayed at the Knights Templar Palace in Jerusalem. It can be seen on Templar architecture all over the island of Malta. The Templars were, and remain, a Catholic organization. Here it is again, as the insignia of the Byzantine Empire, founded by Constantine the Great, who, as we showed, was a member of the Atonist Sol Invicti cult. His armed guards were called the Golden Militia, and they wore the symbol of the double-headed eagle. Well, there's no connection between Masonry and the Vatican. There's no connection between Roman Catholicism and the popes and any of these secret orders. How preposterous to say that. Well, we know that the Knights of Constantine, his guards, walk around with the double-headed eagle, but that's pure coincidence. That has nothing to do with secret societies. We know that the headquarters of the Knights of Malta is round the corner from the Vatican, but that's just coincidence also. Here we see on the bottom part of this picture the imperial standard of the Habsburgian Austro-Hungarian Empire that encompassed Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Slovenia, and Croatia. The double-headed eagle. It's the standard of the royals, the elites. Here it is the Austrian coat of arms under the Habsburgian reign, with a rampant red lion can be seen on the central shield. Down below, there it is with the number 33 in the pyramid, one of the many examples of the Freemasonic double-headed eagle, with the Egyptian pyramid, the crown, the sword, the number 33, signifying the highest grade of Masonic adepts. Of course, on paper, oh, dear old Adam Weishaupt and his Illuminati, they just were burning with anger about aristocracy. They were about humanity. They were about Dionysian debauchery. They were about man being free, the noble savage, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, the Duc d'Orléans, bending over backwards to free humanity from the tyranny of the royals. But the Masonic symbols that they used were originally royal symbols. The man who created them was Charles de Lorraine, one of the most powerful royal families of Europe. Here we have a photograph of Zionist Madeleine Albright with her Atonist eagle. The Albright family were and are lieutenants of the Masonic Atonists situated in London and New York. The term neocon is simply a brand new term for Atonist. No one in the White House serves the true interest of the American people. Quite the contrary, they serve the royals of Britain and Europe. And their insider smiles let you know that that is in fact the case. Here we have a picture of Buckingham Palace from the air. Let us also note that the word buck refers to a male deer. In Program 1 and Section 1, we showed the importance of the stag horns, the stag god and the stag men. We went into that in great depth. Well, it's a pyramidical layout, same as Washington, D.C. and at Paris. Atonists like to remember the good old days, and so to design new cities to stand for a new Egypt, to replace the one they lost long ago. And a study of the symbols is always going to put us onto the right track, as long as we look at them sanely and with education. The emblem of the United States of Europe, here it is, the famous 12 stars again. The star was an ancient term denoting an Essenic master. Originally a Druidic motif, it is used to denote the occult nature of the principal quorum operating behind the obvious seats of power and religion. Finally, we turn to Rome. As we said in Program 1, there are 21 obelisks standing on the planet Earth. There are but 5 in Egypt now. 13 are in Rome. And 13 is an important number, dealing with the zodiac and with occult ritual. Now these obelisks stand at key geomantic positions. Rome, as well as many other Western cities of power, is littered with Egyptian and Irish occult symbols and artifacts. From the obelisks, columns, and fountains of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the pyramids of Raphael, and the pagan mystery school motifs of other Renaissance masters, the Atonist creation and domination of the Vatican, and of the major secret societies can be ascertained. In the book we talk about even various popes having their private apartments completely decorated with Egyptian pagan motifs. We have a whole chapters on this in the Irish Origins book, clearly showing just how this Egyptian Atonist symbolism played a part in the lives of the popes and the bishops, as it still does. Now, Zenith Harris Merrill, in the book Roman Catholicism, states that the Vatican resides on the former temple site of the Roman sun god Mithras. The ancient obelisk phallic symbol in St. Peter's Square was brought to Rome from Heliopolis by a Roman emperor many centuries before Jesus Christ lived and before Christianity.